All right, guys, welcome to part two of the Bioshock analysis. I don't know how many parts I'm going to have to this, but last week we looked at the character design of the enemies, and we kind of observed some of the design decisions that were made by the team and the overall ideas that they were trying to express through the enemy designs. And this week we're going to look at some of the environment concept art. And I am not somebody who is really familiar with the Bioshock Infinite story anymore. It's been a long time since I played the game, but I've always been a huge fan of the aesthetic it is that they brought to the game because I feel like it's so unique. So I'm just reacting to the concept art. Today we're going to be looking at the concept art of Ben Lowe, who did some of the environment stuff for Bioshock Infinite. And I'm just going to be reacting to them as a visual artist, maybe doing a little bit of drawovers on some of these scenes. But other than that, just kind of talking about what it is that I notice. And like I said, I don't know how many parts there's going to be to this. This is just something that I, on the whim, kind of thought would be a cool thing to do. But I do plan on having at least a few episodes of this, and maybe even bringing on some people that worked on the game to interview them, and just have like a separate series of podcasts on that. If that's something you guys would be interested in, then let me know. But so yeah, this first image that we're looking at that Ben Lowe did, um, I, I mean, the thing that I love about the environments and the game itself is really the environmental storytelling. That's what makes Bioshock Bioshock, right? It's like you have these images that have this kind of this creative use of the way it is that they tell the stories in the environment that most other games just don't do. So here we can see that there's this kind of Art Nouveau influence from different artists like Leindecker and other artists from the early American period of golden illustration. Um, we can see that in the aesthetic of just simple things like the typeface of Fink Manufacturing, right? We can see it there. We can see it in the design of this big clock. This feels like this is an old-timey watch that was just blown up to this size because it feels very, very much of that time period, right? It doesn't feel steampunk, is what I'm saying. You know, you could easily see how steampunk would be adjacent to what Bioshock Infinite does. It is closely to that aesthetic, but it's not exactly steampunk. Um, and I think that's a good thing because I'm not a huge fan of steampunk, to be completely honest with you. But it's also in the way it is that the colors are displayed. Like we have these kind of desaturated greens next to these oranges. Everything has a very gold aesthetic to it. It's like the golden light of the sun because Columbus is floating in the air, right? So it's this golden light that seems to shimmer over everything, and everything else is kind of falls into these blue and greenish steels that are used to build the environment. Again, the first thing it is that I notice when I look at this image is the use of gold, right? Like these gold light sources that we find throughout the scene. There's different design decisions it is that are being made that keeps things consistent with the previous image. Like I said, you know, you have these different design decisions like these things coming out of the side of the building. Again, we have the same thing you have in, if you've seen any of my character design analysis or you saw the previous one, we talked about these ideas of big, medium, and small shapes, right? So if you look at the shape design of just this right here, I'm going to take this off, you can see, actually, let me let me go back in here and let me trace over a couple other things. Let me look over these windows right here. Right. So I have these windows, right? Right here, and right here. So if you just look at this element alone, my computer's kind of lagging, that's why it's probably sounds like it wants to take off into space. But anyway, even with just this simple shape that we have here, we have these window shapes, and then we have these vent shapes that are coming up. And notice that they're not all equal. I'll go ahead and turn off my shitty drawing here, and we'll go back and look at the image. We can notice that these shapes here are not equal to one another, right? There's a big, medium, and a small relationship between these different images that gives them a sense of design, right? You can even see that in the rest of the buildings and the different particular parts. You know, we always have things, obviously, that are off in the distance that the player character is moving towards and that they can see from the vantage point of the player as he moves through the environment. But it also comes down to the way it is that certain things are organized in the environment. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at another one here. There's a really good storytelling element here. Again, we have this combination between the golden light and the desaturated greens. And the desaturated greens in this environment are toned up quite a bit. And why is that? Well, from what I remember, this is the office of the main character. I completely forgot his name. His name slips my mind. But, right, so we have like this storytelling element that we could just pick up just from looking at the environment. Even though I can't remember the character's name, and it's been so long since I played the game that I really couldn't tell you the story. We don't need to really go and find any additional information to figure out what this character is about, right? We look at his environment and we see that he's got alcohol bottles laying everywhere, right? So this is a repeating pattern that's telling a story. We see a typewriter on the desk, and we see a trash bin that's full of paper. So could this be, you know, I believe he's a detective, so this could be somebody who is a frustrated detective. That's kind of the aesthetic it is that I get from this. The frustrated detective in a noir film or a noir aesthetic, right? So it fits into that trope of the alcoholic detective that has some sort of personal issue that he's working through, right? But you can also say that the windows are primarily blocked out. The two windows that sit behind his chair are completely blacked out, or not completely, but they're partially blacked out, and the other ones are covered up with a slight screen. So it's almost like he's trying to keep the light out in a way, right? Like there's a conscious decision by him to almost live this kind of like nocturnal existence, and maybe that would be because, you know, he has a hangover in the morning and he goes to sit down and work, and you know, he doesn't want the sunlight coming in and giving him a migraine, right? It's just too jarring for him. I mean, I love pieces like this. Like this piece is such a mood, right? You have this burning building, and then you have this woman sweeping in front of it. Really, really beautiful, poignant image. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I don't even know much of what to say about it. Everything is saturated in this kind of a red color, which feels very foreboding, obviously. But again, you know, you see these different elements of design, right? You see these elements of design in terms of the storefronts, the way it is that the panels and the windows are set up. Like I said, you can tell from this window, and this window, as well as these canopies, that even though there is a symmetry to the design of this building in and of itself, it's not the parts that that make it feel symmetrical are themselves not always symmetrical, if that makes sense. There's details and there's things going on here that break up the symmetry, right? So like we have this frame of this door right here, and this frame is completely symmetrical. But then we have a different kind of busted glass over here. We have different text in each one of these boxes. Each one of these boxes is a different size, right? And then obviously we have more garbage. And then when we pull out, we see there's more symmetry in the design in terms of like the lights that run across the top of the building. But both sides of this are not equal, right? You have this side, which I guess you could say is its width, is not as long as we have this side, right? So these are all deliberate. So it's almost gotten kind of an L shape, like it's an L shape that's kind of been stuck onto this wall. And then on this side of the L shape, we have, what do we have? We have a bunch of junk, right? We have a whole bunch of junk, which is keeping the player from going in this direction, obviously. Obviously, we want the character to walk around this way. And this is when it gets into subtle forms of game development, because you obviously are wanting them to walk this way because you have a light that's shining over here, whereas over here in this corner, it's dark and it's completely covered in garbage. So this side, the left side of the building, is being used for like a storytelling element. Maybe all this food that's sitting out here is bad. They could be going through some form of starvation. Obviously, there's been riots, and we're getting the storytelling image here of this shopkeeper that is trying to clean up after people have destroyed her business. Yeah, so I mean, the designs of these buildings it's really creative and really cool. Like I said, you can tell he's taking influence. They're taking influence from artists like Leyendecker and like a lot of the other magazine illustrators of the early 1900s, the Americana aesthetic. And we see that same aesthetic represented through everything. We see the red and we see the blue, the red, white, and blue of the American flag, and we see that carried throughout the whole design, right? And then we have this gold that's brought into the image, which is obviously closely related to the Americana art style, this kind of like prestige that they're trying to communicate with the designs of these buildings. They're epic, they're bigger than life, they're bigger than you, right? So even something like a barber shop has tremendous amount of personality. And again, just if you look at it in terms of a simple design, right? The designs of these windows are not equal, right? Obviously, you have this big one, and then you have the door, and then you have these two on the side, right? And then you have decorations on the top, and you have like this scissor shape here, right? So you have different elements that are big, medium, and small. You could almost say that these are like, well, these are more like cylindrical objects, but from our point of view, they're almost rectangles, right? And these are on either side of a very rectangular or a very square building. And within that building are smaller squares and rectangles of varying sizes, right? And they're all concentrated here on the bottom part of this building, whereas the top part is balanced against all of these small shapes. There's all these small shapes on the bottom of this building. And in order to balance that, we have these triangular shapes of the scissors here. We have the circular shapes here. And I guess you could say that these are either rectangular, or you could say they're cylindrical objects. They almost look rectangular from our perspective, but obviously they're cylindrical, right? And so you have this balance of these different shapes, these circles, triangles, and squares that that create a sense of design, right? Because if all of these shapes were small, then the building would just look kind of unorganized. It wouldn't have any kind of organizing principle behind it in terms of the design, right? But obviously, this building has a square design to it, and that square design is then replicated in smaller squares on the building. And then in order to spice things up, in order to create variety, we don't want just a building that's just a square because that's just boring. But if we look at the top of the building, we see the triangle shapes, and we see the circle, and we see the bigger shapes. You know, we would imagine these shapes. We would imagine I can't remember what these things are called either. These bar stools or whatever they are that you see outside of barbershops. We would imagine them to be the size of the door, right? That's what I think of. I think of them as being the size of the door. But here he's made them much bigger, and then also put this giant ribbon on it. So it's almost like it's wrapped up like a present. Really cool. Again, I guess this is another exploration of the main character's like office. You know, we see a desk that is it's so crammed and it's so small, right? And so we get this sense that this is a character that is very his mind is very cluttered, because look at his workspace. His workspace is a complete like, what could you do on this workspace? You have to constantly be moving things around. You have to constantly be changing things in this small little environment that I imagine would be very uncomfortable. And then we see that same kind of we get that same sort of vibe from the piles of stuff over here, and then obviously the photos and the notes on the wall. This kind of singular fan. We can imagine the loneliness that takes place in this room by something as simple as this fan, right? Because it suggests to us the kind of the hum of a fan, just kind of going through the paces, and what he might feel from that, right? So it all communicates this kind of feeling, right? Even this kind of singular light that's kind of coming down from this desk lamp. Of course, everything is green, and it's kind of this depressing green and brown, right? So really good storytelling and just setting up basic things. I think we've just got a couple more here, and then I'll let you guys go. Idle hands are the devil's plaything. That's an interesting thing to put above a work factory. You know, is that some sort of propaganda? You know, we have these crosses here as well. So I would actually be interested in knowing more, like what the actual storytelling is going on here, because the other thing we see is these. It looks like maybe biblical scriptures going by. So is this like a mass production of like a print factory that's just printing out masses of propaganda? Did they rewrite biblical scripture in order to fit their propaganda? Right. But regardless, from a visual perspective, you know, we have this perspective that's going back in the distance like this. And that is us looking up at it really creates a mood. And again, we get this kind of gold light that kind of comes through the image and saturates all this steel that we have here. Yeah, I think we just got a couple more. We're just going to go through these quickly. I don't want to hold you guys up too much longer. Again, there's just so much beautiful design decisions going on in this environment. You know, we see it up here. in these like lanterns that are carrying this giant building. I'm actually in Thailand right now, and this reminds me of Loy Krathong. I think that's how you pronounce it. Like these floating lanterns. And then again, you have this gold, this prestige gold that just covers everything. Really beautiful. This is one of the shots of one of the blimps. Very nice composition, but also just an awesome mood to the piece. Yeah, we'll go ahead and end it on this one. I think this one's pretty appropriate. So I would be interested in actually digging more into the story. Maybe that's one of the next parts that I'll do. There's a guy that I have interviewed on this YouTube channel. His name is Reinstall Paul, and I'll include his podcast in the notes above. So you can go and check out that interview. But on his YouTube channel, he has a very thorough breakdown of the stories of Bioshock Infinite and Bioshock 1 and 2, I believe. And he really gets deep into like the story and the metaphors and whatnot, the visual metaphors and whatnot that are being used throughout the games. So I'd highly recommend check out his channel. I'll probably bring him on, and we'll probably go back over some of these images and talk about some of those. I'll also include a link to the Bioshock Infinite videos that he does in my description box. But anyway, yeah, this is a really beautiful image. I mean, again, it shows this kind of optimism, this optimism of early 1900s America, and that's represented in the color scheme, obviously, and just the epicness of everything. I think this is pretty apparent. I don't really need to get too much into breaking this down. All right, guys. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I've got some more podcasts coming up. For those that are interested, I've been doing a series of podcasts where I interview game designers. So I've got a couple of interviews with game designers on here. The guy who did Deus Ex, not the full game, but the mobile game, I believe it was called Downfall. I did an interview with him, and I've done quite a few other interviews, and I've got some different stuff coming up, some new tutorials, different things along those lines. So yeah, please check out the other stuff I have on this channel, and let me know what you think, let me know what you like, and take care, guys.